Chosen ones, the moment has come where silence itself has become louder than every word ever spoken. Deep within the corridors of power, beyond the reach of public cameras and staged speeches, your name has been whispered with a weight that could fracture nations. The Vatican, an institution older than empires and bound by secrets carved into stone and scripture, has traced your bloodline across centuries, through archives sealed in wax, and into a prophecy long guarded by hands too afraid to reveal it. Their confirmation was not done lightly, for to verify your bloodline meant to admit that prophecy was never metaphor. It was DNA, carried through you. But prophecy never rests in isolation. The moment the verification was sealed, a new silence spread across the globe. Military satellites, once locked on every frequency, suddenly froze. Signal channels once open to civilian chatter flickered into dead static. Entire regions went dark, not because of natural disaster, but because of one directive whispered behind secure doors: cut the lines, stop the flow, protect the coordinates at all cost. No one outside the circles of power knew why, but you were at the center of it. This blackout was not designed for the public. It was designed for you, to keep you from hearing the frequencies meant for your awakening, to silence the signals that would have confirmed what your spirit already knows, that the world has waited for your recognition. They thought by cutting signals, they could cut destiny. But destiny is not wired through satellites. It is etched into spirit, carved into time, and shielded by forces far greater than earthly militaries. What they failed to understand is that silence speaks. The absence of signals has only amplified the pull within you, the call that cannot be muted. Every blackout, every dead frequency, is itself a signal pointing you back to the truth. You were meant to be hidden, until the moment no one could deny it anymore. The Vatican has always been known for its silence, its walls holding more than just scripture, but scrolls, parchments, and codices that stretch back beyond the founding of nations. Hidden away from public eyes, beneath marble floors walked upon by pilgrims, there are rooms where even the highest priests enter only with trembling. In one of these hidden chambers, your name surfaced, not as ink written by man, but as a pattern traced across genealogical records, bloodline charts, and forgotten symbols that aligned only once in every 1,000 years. What startled them most was not the presence of your lineage, but the moment in history it resurfaced. It was now, when signs in the heavens and the unrest of nations seemed to echo the very warnings written in texts they swore were allegories. The whispers began as subtle exchanges between archivists who were forbidden to speak aloud of what they had seen. One dared to question whether this was coincidence, but even that word felt like a betrayal. Coincidence does not arrange the precise alignment of bloodline markers stretching from ancient tribes to modern DNA sequencing. Coincidence does not weave prophecy into chromosomes. It was a confirmation none could deny, yet none could declare openly. To speak your name in that chamber meant acknowledging a truth that would shake the foundation of empires, both spiritual and political. So they locked it away, hoping the silence of stone walls would suppress the tremor they felt in their souls. Yet, the silence could not hold, for silence in sacred places has always been a herald. The more they tried to bury your name beneath wax seals and coded entries, the louder the truth seemed to resound in their own thoughts. Priests found themselves unable to sleep. Archivists woke in the night with visions, and in the stillness of prayer, Some claimed they heard the echo of footsteps not belonging to any man. It was in this haunting quiet that one question spread like wildfire in whispers. Why now? And why you? No one dared to answer, because the answer itself would force them to unveil prophecies that spoke of upheaval, of kingdoms falling, and of light piercing through veils carefully kept by centuries of guardians. The silence in the archives could not hold forever, for silence always breeds suspicion. What began as whispers soon demanded verification, and in the modern halls of Vatican science, where faith meets technology, bloodlines are no longer traced by parchment alone. Hidden deep in the vaults are genetic databases gathered through centuries, samples carried across continents, relics preserved not only for history but for prophecy. It was within this vault that your DNA, collected through channels you were never told existed, was cross-examined against sequences long guarded as sacred. The results shook them, not because they were uncertain, but because they were undeniable. Line by line, marker by marker, the code spoke louder than words. The pattern that emerged aligned not with just any ancestry, but with one whispered through prophecy, one connected to scrolls long hidden from the public eye. The Vatican scientists were not only tasked with keeping faith alive, but also with ensuring prophecy remained sealed until the appointed time. And yet, here it was, unfolding on screens in cold, clinical precision. It was as though the very heavens had chosen to inscribe your name not only into Scripture, but into the building blocks of your existence. Some within those halls wept, for they remembered the words of Yeshua, who once said, "The very stones will cry out." If stones could declare his truth, what then could DNA do when aligned with destiny? They began to understand that the silence of archives and the blackout of militaries were not acts of suppression alone. They were confessions. Confessions that they knew who you were. Confessions that the time of concealment was ending. Still, fear outweighed faith. Rather than declaring it openly, they restricted the files, layering digital locks upon ancient seals, pretending to themselves that locking the data could delay the inevitable. But those who saw the results could not unsee them. The alignment of bloodlines and prophecy spread like a current among the inner circles, spoken only in coded phrases during candlelit gatherings. They knew the danger of what it meant if the truth left their walls. It would not only rewrite history, it would rewrite identity, authority, even the legitimacy of those who claimed power over nations and churches alike. When the files were matched and your DNA confirmed, a ripple of unease surged beyond the marble walls of the Vatican. It reached into the hidden chambers of military command, where satellites circle silently above the earth, watching every heartbeat of the world. In a single moment, without warning, entire communication grids dimmed. Satellites that had never faltered in decades of service went dark. Operators stared at blank screens where streams of data once flowed, their hands hovering over controls that no longer responded. There was no solar flare, no meteor storm, no natural cause. The blackout was total, deliberate, and untraceable. To those who monitor signals, silence is the loudest alarm. Intelligence officers demanded answers, but none came. Engineers scoured systems and found no malfunction, no sabotage, no code breach. It was as though the satellites themselves had obeyed an unseen command, retreating into silence the instant your name surfaced in records meant to stay hidden. Some whispered of classified protocols, emergency fail-safes never acknowledged in public. Others claimed the silence came from above, not by human order, but by forces beyond circuitry and wires. As the blackout stretched, panic spread within secret councils. Networks that controlled surveillance, guidance, and encrypted transmissions all failed in unison. Yet curiously, civilian life felt little of it. The blackout was surgical, precise, aimed not at the masses, but at the hidden corridors of power. Whatever the trigger, the silence was selective, ensuring only those in command would feel its weight. Those who understood the deeper currents could not ignore the timing. The blackout occurred at the very hour the Vatican sealed its verification of your bloodline. Two institutions, worlds apart, one spiritual, one military, yet bound by the same silence. The conclusion became inescapable. This was not coincidence, but convergence. Some officers demanded the blackout be reversed. Others feared what reactivation might reveal. There were whispers in the command rooms, asking if destiny itself had shut the signals down, if what had been hidden for centuries could not be broadcast without consequence. The screens remained dark, the silence stretching into hours that felt like days. And in that silence, a new awareness settled upon them. The blackout was not an error to fix, but a message to decode. In the heart of command centers buried beneath layers of concrete and steel, there exists a room where no sound is permitted to escape. Phones are left outside, windows do not exist, and the walls are lined with technology designed to swallow every vibration. It was in this silent chamber that generals gathered after the blackout, their faces pale under the glow of emergency lights, their voices hushed, as though any word spoken too loudly would summon something they could not control. The reports lay scattered across the table, sheets marked with the timestamp of the exact moment the Vatican sealed its confirmation. The overlap was undeniable, and yet none dared to say the connection aloud. Some argued it was a breach, others claimed it was sabotage, but every theory dissolved into the same dead end. The blackout had not been caused by any known adversary, nor had it followed the predictable patterns of cyber warfare. It was too clean, too precise, as if the very satellites themselves had bowed to an unseen authority. That reality weighed heavier than any enemy they had ever faced. For enemies can be tracked, targeted, and neutralized. But how does one confront an unseen hand that commands even machines to obey? The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of breathing, the shifting of boots, and the occasional clearing of a throat. Every eye avoided the others, for to meet a gaze was to risk acknowledgement of the thought each man carried, that the blackout was not a threat but a sign. Yet who among them had the courage to admit that prophecy had entered their war rooms? One commander, with trembling hands, recited words under his breath, a verse he had memorized in childhood, though long abandoned in adulthood. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The mention of Yeshua in that moment felt like a breach of protocol, yet it silenced the room more deeply than any command. The truth was not in the reports nor in the machines, but in the reality that something greater than their authority had taken control. And so they chose silence. Orders were issued without being written, instructions carried without documentation. No one outside that room would ever be told the full extent of what happened, but the question none of them dared put to paper. Beneath the grand stone cathedrals, that rise like monuments to eternity. There are levels the public never sees. Dim corridors echo with footsteps of those permitted entry, and iron gates guard staircases that spiral downward into vaults older than the cities above them. It is here, beneath stained glass and holy hymns, that records of bloodlines are kept, not simply as historical curiosities, but as living keys to mysteries woven into the fabric of time. Your name did not emerge by accident. It was drawn out of these vaults, pieced together from fragments long thought to be disconnected, until the pattern of your ancestry revealed itself with a clarity that even the most skeptical could not dismiss. The codes are not written in plain language. They are layered in symbols carved into marble, etched into gold leaf, whispered in liturgical chants whose meanings were disguised as devotion. Generations of guardians memorized sequences of names, dates, and hidden sigils, passing them along not as history, but as prophecy in waiting. When your bloodline aligned with those sequences, it was as though a lock finally met its key. The cathedrals themselves seemed to tremble with the weight of the revelation. Some priests who handled the documents claimed they felt a presence pressing against their hearts, as though unseen eyes were upon them. Others reported dreams the very night after handling the parchments, dreams of cities collapsing and seas parting, of a figure standing in the midst of chaos with light radiating from their very being. These were not men inclined to mysticism, yet the visions came unbidden, like ripples from a stone dropped into water. The deeper they studied the codes, the more impossible it became to deny that history itself had been arranged to lead to this discovery. And yet, those who sought to bury the truth grew more desperate. Seals were doubled, vaults were locked again, and entire passages of archives were labeled as restricted. But secrets do not remain secrets when prophecy demands unveiling. The bloodline was not just documented, it was activated. Once revealed, the codes began to resound in ways that could not be hidden, appearing in unexpected places, echoing in prayers, surfacing in symbols carved centuries before your birth, in military halls where orders are delivered with precision, and every word carries consequence. There are few things more unusual than silence. Yet, in the aftermath of the blackout, silence became the unspoken directive. Reports were drafted with blank spaces where your name should have appeared. Coded references replaced what could not be spoken, and generals who were trained to face down nuclear threats found themselves unable to give voice to a single identity. It was not fear of an enemy, but fear of acknowledgement. To say your name aloud was to affirm that prophecy had infiltrated their most guarded institutions. One by one, briefings were conducted in hushed tones. Maps were rolled out, satellite imagery examined, but whenever the discussion turned toward you, the air grew heavy. Some officers described a physical weight pressing against their chests when they attempted to articulate what had been uncovered. Others claimed their words were swallowed in their throats, as though unseen hands silenced them. They wrote, they gestured, they circled coordinates, but they did not speak. The silence was more powerful than their ranks, stronger than their weapons. Amid this silence, there were a few who could not deny what they had been taught as children, but had long abandoned as men of war. A verse surfaced in the mind of one commander as he stared at the blacked-out maps before him. Before Abraham was, I am. Yeshua's words echoed in his thoughts, refusing to leave. It was not merely about ancestry, it was about eternity, woven into identity. He began to wonder if this silence was not fear, but reverence, forced upon them by powers greater than their own. The refusal to speak your name became policy, though never officially written. Orders were handed down in fragments, encrypted codes replaced spoken designations, and meetings ended with more questions than answers. Generals who had never hesitated to declare war found themselves retreating into silence when it came to you. The blackout had shut down their machines, but the weight of your bloodline had shut down their tongues. And in that silence, an awareness grew stronger by the hour. They were not withholding your name because of secrecy alone. They were withholding it because to speak it would trigger a chain of recognition they could no longer control. There are vaults older than the Vatican itself, chambers hidden within monasteries, carved into stone cliffs, where scrolls bound in animal skin have rested untouched for centuries. They were written in scripts so ancient that even scholars strained to read them, and sealed with symbols that were said to break only when the rightful bearer appeared. For generations, these scrolls were considered relics of myth, objects kept not for study but for reverence. Yet, when the blackout struck and your bloodline was confirmed, the guardians of these vaults reported something no one could ignore. The scrolls began to glow. It was not the faint shimmer of candlelight reflecting against parchment, nor the tricks of shadows in darkened rooms. This glow was its own presence, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat, illuminating words that had been faded by time. The glow intensified whenever your name was whispered, and when the scrolls were unrolled, the writing shifted as if alive, aligning itself into patterns that no scribe could have produced by hand. The elders who guarded these relics fell to their knees in silence, for they understood what was happening. These were not simple records, they were prophetic blueprints, waiting for the convergence of lineage and time. And the timing was precise. It was now, not a generation before, not a century after. The light was a signal, a confirmation, that the prophecy written into those scrolls had found its living counterpart. Some among them remembered the words of Yeshua, "I am the light of the world." The glow of the scrolls carried echoes of that same truth, not as metaphor, but as manifestation. To them, it was clear. The prophecy was no longer a story to be read, but a reality to be lived. Still, they hesitated to make it known. Fear of upheaval weighed against faith in revelation, and secrecy once again became their shield. Far from the echoing halls of cathedrals and the candlelit glow of monasteries, there are chambers deep underground where prophecy is not written on parchment, but encoded into data streams. These are the places where the most advanced machines hum without pause, where algorithms search endlessly through endless lines of information, where men believe they hold mastery over knowledge itself. Yet even in these fortified rooms, something occurred that no system could explain. The guardians who worked there began reporting figures of light at the edge of their vision, silhouettes that shimmered with wings, standing watch over terminals and sealed drives as though protecting them from intrusion. At first, these reports were dismissed as exhaustion. Long hours, dim screens, and the strain of secrecy can bend the mind. But when multiple witnesses describe the same presence, towering beings with radiance brighter than fluorescent lamps, faces hidden yet eyes burning with impossible clarity, their accounts could not be ignored. Cameras flickered, but no recordings were captured. Security systems looped endlessly, showing empty corridors even as men swore they stood face to face with beings not of this earth. The scientists and analysts soon realized the data they were protecting was not theirs alone. Files connected to your bloodline, Encrypted records of genealogical links and prophecy charts had become inaccessible. Passwords failed, drives refused to open, and yet the screens did not display errors. Instead, faint streaks of light traced across the monitors, forming patterns that resembled wings. The message was unspoken, but undeniable. The information was guarded, and it would not be retrieved until the time was right. Whispers spread among the staff that these were not hallucinations, but angels, stationed as sentinels by divine order. Some who had abandoned faith entirely fell silent in reverence, recognizing that what they served in secrecy was no longer a system of man but a revelation orchestrated by heaven itself. Their presence was not to harm, but to shield, preventing the misuse of data that could alter history if released too soon. And still, the guardians of those chambers wrestled with a question they dared not voice. If angels were guarding the data, then who were they guarding it for? The answer, though never spoken aloud, pressed on their minds with relentless weight. When the moment comes, the sealed files will not open by command, but only in your presence. Beneath the polished marble corridors of the Vatican, deeper than tourists could ever imagine, lies a door that has no record. It is not marked on blueprints, nor spoken of in official tours, yet those who serve long enough in the shadows know it exists. The door is iron, bound with symbols older than Rome itself, and behind it rests a chamber referred to only in whispers as the Forbidden Room. Few have entered, and those who have returned with eyes that no longer meet the gaze of others. For within this place lies the archive that predates nations, filled with relics that confirm what prophecy has guarded for centuries. When your bloodline was confirmed, the guardians of this room convened in secrecy. Scrolls were unsealed, relics unwrapped, parchments unrolled with trembling hands. What they found was not merely history, but instruction. The texts spoke of a lineage that would appear when the balance of the world tilted beyond repair, when empires rotted from within, and the cries of nations rose like smoke to heaven. The markings on the scrolls, faded through time, pulsed faintly as if aware of your presence, even from afar. Witnesses described hearing faint sounds in the chamber, whispers that were not their own, echoes of voices reciting passages in languages long forgotten. Candles flickered without draft, and the temperature shifted as though unseen forces pressed against the walls. It was here that fear grew most palpable, for the Forbidden Room had always been a vault of secrets. But now it seemed to awaken, responding not to the guardians who kept it, but to the one for whom it had waited. The elders debated in hushed tones. Some urged destruction, fearing what would happen if these relics were exposed. Others argued that prophecy cannot be destroyed, only delayed. They remembered the warning of Yeshua, "Nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." These words, once read as metaphor, now echoed as reality within the room that had never known light. Still, no decision was reached. The Forbidden Room remained sealed once more, its relics bound again, yet its presence heavier than before. The blackout was spoken of in closed-door meetings as a threat, a breach, a disruption that left the most powerful institutions exposed. But those who looked deeper began to see that silence itself was not punishment. It was protection. The cutting of signals, the static that filled screens, the satellites gone dark at the very moment your bloodline was confirmed, all pointed to a truth that few were willing to admit aloud. It was not designed to silence you. It was designed to shield you. Within the corridors of military intelligence, there are logs detailing attempted breaches that never reached the public. Frequencies hijacked, transmissions intercepted, coordinates traced, all erased in the instant the blackout swept across their systems. What should have been access points into your life became locked doors, sealed by an authority no one could override. And those who reviewed the digital wreckage found something more unsettling. The blackout had erased certain files entirely, but not randomly. The erasures were surgical, removing only the data that could be weaponized against you. Everything else remained untouched. This precision forced even the most skeptical to question the source. Machines do not choose morality. Algorithms do not distinguish destiny. The blackout acted not as a blunt force, but as a guardian. And in the silence that followed, some began to recall words they had long buried. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." The words of Yeshua rang like a hidden frequency beneath the static, suggesting that the silence was never empty at all. It was filled with guidance, inaudible to those not meant to hear it. For those in power, the realization struck fear. They had sought to control the flow of signals, but signals had turned against them. They had believed themselves the masters of surveillance, yet their systems bent to a will higher than theirs. The blackout revealed not weakness, but the limits of human authority, exposing that no command center, no satellite, no encrypted code could stand against what was already written into time. And now, the silence lingers like a veil before revelation. If the blackout was not meant to silence you, but to protect you, then the question is no longer about what was taken away.